Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Colter Wall called Songs of the Plains. I have absolutely no excuse for why I didn't cover Colter Wall's self-titled album last year. Even given that some of my schedule has been driven more through Patreon requests than anything over the past couple of years, still working to refine the details of how to best optimize that. Hang in tight for 2019, folks. Things will be changing. But Colter Wall seems like the sort of project that I should have been the first person talking about. A voice splitting the difference between Leonard Cohen and Tom Waits, the sort of brittle, stripped down, defiantly country blues instrumentation and production that's got the confidence to rely on minimalism because the lyrical content would hold up. And to top it off, he's from the Canadian Midwest on the prairies in Saskatchewan, and he's only in his early 20s. He's younger than me. Hell, most of you probably don't know this, but I grew up in Manitoba on the prairies, only going east for university and work. So if there's an album that could capture some of that wild resonance from me growing up, it would come from this guy. And I went back to his debut. It really is genuinely great. So yeah, I screwed up major by not giving Colter Wall more of a platform earlier or reviewing his self-titled album last year. I'm not going to mess around this time. He's got a new project that's accruing a lot of attention, produced by Dave Cobb, because of course it is. And given what he's done with Chris Stapleton and Jason Isbell in the past, Dave Cobb can still find dynamics in that bare minimalism that Colter Wall has made his own sound. Or to put it another way, I had really high expectations that this would kick ass. In a subtle, reserved, quiet Canadian sort of way, but it probably would. Was I right? Well, you know, it's appropriate that I'm covering this right after I reviewed Greta Van Fleet, a band who tried so damn hard to capture the airs of a band long past and wound up not picking up enough of the firepower, but too many of the original article's unfortunate choices. Now, Colter Wall, on the other hand, he's just as indebted to the past in his sound and is just as striking as a vocal timbre, but it seems to have a much stronger grasp on texture and composition in order to set the scene. Now, the question of whether Songs of the Plains is too entrenched within the tones of the past, that's much more difficult to say. This album has niche written all over it, even in indie country, because of how and when these songs are grounded, and I wouldn't quite say it's got the individual standouts of his last album, but you know what, for what it is, it works, and it wound up being really good. And to describe the sound, well, it's a brand of barren, very acoustic country with some subtle percussion, distant keening pedal steel, and hints of blues coming through the harmonica that could feel rooted in the turn of the century. And when I say that, I'm returning to the 1900s, as these tones and song structures, even outside of the covers, they call back to an era before country and blues were formally codified as genres. And when you couple it with Colter Wall's thick, heavy baritone and bass, these are songs that are meant to feel old, foundational even, and I'd be remiss not to highlight how distinctly Canadian some of these songs feel. I do have a couple issues with Dave Cobb's production that we will get to, but one thing I respect is giving Colter Wall's voice enough space to command it all, but never lose the sense of how vast and empty that space can be, which if you spend any time driving across the Midwest, you will understand that feeling. And it's not precisely dusty either. We're talking about Canadian music that's comfortable embracing bare austerity and letting just enough of a real chill creep through. And yeah, it does mean the album doesn't exactly build to an old-fashioned rollicking groove consistently, but that's intentional. These are midnight campfire songs or cowboys far from home on the windswept rural plains, where the minimalism naturally forces attention to every fine detail that comes through. And for the record, it also puts the lie to anybody saying this is a hipster playing to tones of the past. There's just too much attention to detail and subtleness and reserve to feel less than authentic. Now that said, if I do have an issue with Cobb, it's tied more to the underlying compositions than the delivery. Great tones, a lot of texture, that'll get you a long way with me. But if the underlying songs don't have enough meat to them, it can make for fragments that feel a little undercooked. Don't get me wrong, the echoing pedal steel on John Bayer's Chimera song, it's a great for a melodic foundation, but the song feels missing a verse or two to finish off the story that's being told. And the traditional night herding song, it's damn near a cappella. Again, Colter Wall's voice, it sounds great, but there's very little to it beyond that for the song. And I get where it might fit within the album as almost more of an interlude, but it does run a little long in that vein. And I do think when it comes to the shorter cuts, like The Trains Are Gone, probably fares the best with the harmonica, but it's a good melodic foundation that could have afforded a little bit more expansion. There's no reason not to. And on top of that, when this album settles more into its groove, it's hard not to wonder if Colter Wall might be a shade too reserved for his own good as a singer. He does rely on a lot of subtlety, and I'd never say this gets monotonous or boring, but as the album proceeds, you have to wonder if this approach embalms the songs rather than breathing into them a little bit more life and vigor, making them feel relevant to now. And if Dave Cobb eased up on some of the reverb, that could have helped for the vocals. But on the flip side, when you've got the song Tying Knots in the Devil's Tail with features from Corb Lund and Blake Berglund contributing their own verses, well, it's kind of a light way to end off the album, but I can't help but be reminded of when Jason Eady ended Daylight and Dark back in 2014 with guest appearances from Evan Felker and Hayes Carl, and it didn't quite feel tonally consistent in the same way. It just kind of threw me off for the very end. And this does take us to the lyrics, and really, when 4 of the 11 songs are covers or traditional cuts, I don't exactly have a lot to say, beyond the fact that for as good as Colter Wall is in setting the scene in his own writing with a lot of richly Canadian detail, which I definitely respect, I do wish more steps were taken to tell stories within that scene with a little bit more of a narrative. Of songs that Colter Wall didn't write, I'd say that Wild Dog's probably the best example of this, the outro breakdown included. Now, on the one hand, I'm not surprised we didn't get more of the folk-leaning story songs. Colter Wall is deliberately calling back to an era where setting the scene was often all that was given in the songs, with maybe a call to action for the audience, but little else. But on the other hand, where this album is at its best is when we get hints of more drama that's nestled into the subtext that's behind the scenes. A standoff between the Prairie Boy and the Toronto man looking to hustle him on Saskatchewan in 1881, the outlaw fable of Wild Bill Hickok, or especially the more modern-seeming cuts in the back half, like Thinkin on a Woman from a lonely trucker on the road, or the junkie remorsefully picking up a score from a gas station drug dealer on Manitoba Man. And the big reason why these songs connect most strongly for me is not just a sense of greater drama or emotional complexity, which is definitely there, but also grounding older tones in modern storytelling and iconography. It proves that this is more than just a retro throwback, that beyond the aesthetic, the songs still have relevance nowadays. And if you can make that feel convincing with this style of country in your songwriting, there is a lot of resonance and an audience that's really willing to get on board, and hell, I'm one of them. Now, as it is, I'm not quite sure Songs of the Plains gets all the way there for me. Again, it's a niche listen, even within country. It's austere, it's traditional damn near to a fault, feels a little bit longer than it probably is. There isn't a lot of momentum, and again, I'm not sure this has the gripping standouts of that last project. That said, Colter Wall, he's in his early 20s, and if he's capable of bringing this level of poise, subtlety, and texture to the table and playing tribute to history but with a unique presence, I think this guy's got a ton of potential. Which means I'm giving this a very solid 7 out of 10, absolutely a recommendation. Again, if you're a non-country fan, even with Colter Wall's excellent singing, it might be a little bit too back in time outside of your wheelhouse, but if he's enough to hook you, you'll probably find something to really like with this. So yeah, check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I'm a little late to the punch with this, but again, it's low-key, it's restrained, and I don't think anybody else is covering it, so might as well buy or stream it. Links down below. And I got the poll up there. I know Colter Wall's diehard fan base might think I'm a little hard on this, but again, I think this kid's got a ton of potential. I really want to see where he takes this, especially given that he's got a little more of the industry behind him. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process so I could have covered this earlier or help support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys can add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. Indie artists, if you want to actually have me cover your music, the way to get there is through my Patreon. And if you want to see my schedule, it's on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.